Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
The Red Apple Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
And welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. Video of this moment was seen around the world as it has come to symbolize what happens with a broken U.S. border. Recently, hundreds of Venezuelan migrants, single adult males, stormed a razor wire fence in El Paso, Texas, breaking through and also trampling on a number of members of the National Guard in the process. Well, the journalist who saw it all firsthand, along with her photographer, is the Texas reporter for the New York Post. She's also a great investigative broadcaster who has spent a lot of time covering the border and also immigration issues, Jennie Taer. Jennie, it's really great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
What did you see firsthand?
Well, as you detailed, there was a rampage of migrants. They overrun the soldiers, the Texas National Guard soldiers down in El Paso, Texas, just recently. And what we saw there was something that we didn't expect. There was a group of 600 migrants in a very orderly set of two lines, one with men, adult men mostly, and one with the families, the children, the women. And it was those adult men that realized that Texas authorities were turning them back to Mexico. There were about 300 of those men. And a group of those men decided that they would push the barrier. They would literally push down the Texas border wire there. They would run through it. They'd run past the soldiers, assaulting them on the way, making their way up to the border wall where they knew Border Patrol was waiting for them on the other side. That was their hope, was to get released into the country. But what Texas authorities were doing as part of, this ongoing standoff with state and federal authorities is they were pushing these groups back. They were saying, single adults, you guys got to go back to Mexico. And federal authorities are the ones that say, you know what, we have to take you into custody. But we know what happens, and the migrants know what happens when they do get into custody, is they have an opportunity to stay in the country. And oftentimes that opportunity is very likely to be the reality for them. So this situation, they became very agitated. They assaulted these soldiers. They stomped on some of them. They tried to take a firearm from another, and they were armed with knives and shanks. And that's the situation we had.
Wow. So they were armed with knives and shanks. That's very dangerous. I mean, did the law enforcement realize how armed these guys were and how dangerous of a situation it was?
I think that they just didn't have the capabilities, especially the manpower, to be able to handle this, because you had a couple hundred people against just a handful of soldiers. And so since then, we've seen the state of Texas really beef up the presence down there. We've seen an increase in deployments from other areas of the border coming to El Paso, more of those soldiers that are on the orders of Governor Abbott, as well as Texas Department of Public Safety troopers that were down there. I observed them with much more of fortifying it heavily with more wire, but also armed with more tools. So they had, some of the tactical gear. They had some of the, the riot shields. They had pepper ball guns so that they could control a riot, because now they're starting to see some of that spring surge again. The weather's a little better. Migrants realize, I think, that SB 4, the state law, to allow state and local authorities to make arrests for illegal entry, that's not going into play anymore, at least for the time being. So they're kind of pushing where they can. And right now, Texas is saying we're holding the line.
Talk about also the razor wire. How much razor wire is up there? And were you surprised that they were able to break through it? How sturdy is that razor wire? Because, of course, Texas would love to build the wall.
Right. So some of that razor wire was, of course, cut by these migrants. And this is something we've seen in the last few days as well. Some footage from our photographer down there. They use bolt cutters to cut them. So you'd have to have someone with that capability. So there's usually one person who does that and then lets the group through, kind of like the smuggling going on right before your eyes. The Texas authorities have found those holes being cut, and they've tried to stand in front of those big groups, telling them they can't cross, and we've seen them get pushed away. And since we've been down there, they've been doubling the amount of razor wire that was there. So they're really trying to, again, fortify that area, try to make sure people don't cross there. And for a few months, we saw that a lot of these efforts by the state have pushed the majority of the migrant flows to places like California and Arizona. It does have an effect on the smuggling and the routes that migrants are taking.
You know, you talked about also, though, now it's a spring surge. So, and now that they're seeing that this Texas law so far is sort of in a standstill, they're waiting to see what happens. So you believe they're sort of taking advantage of the moment.
Exactly. I think talking to them, some of them worry about the possibility of that going into play. If that were in play right now, when that group crossed, it's likely they would have been apprehended and charged with the charges under SB4, with illegal entry under state charges. And the state is actually trying to step in here and say, hey, Border Patrol, whoever you have in custody, try to hold them as long as possible. We're trying to find out who were the agitators here based on the video that was taken. And they are trying to press charges. But it's a very difficult situation when you do have the federal authorities trying to work with the state authorities and vice versa. The federal authorities, for example, their focus is to get people out of custody as quickly as possible. But when you have people that should be charged with something, maybe assaulting an officer, maybe inciting a riot, which is what the state is trying to do, those people the state is trying to really keep in the custody of Border Patrol and then take them into their hands and press charges. They have done that with one individual so far from Honduras who's part of this group.
Now, a lot of them, I understand, were from Venezuela, though, right, too? Or they're different?
So this is, so most of them were from Venezuela, like you said. The one person that they did take into state custody was from Honduras. But yes, the majority of these people were Venezuelan. We saw a lot of Venezuelans on the streets of El Paso, and those individuals that we spoke with were people we refer to often as gotaways. They had not been apprehended by federal authorities. They had snuck across, actually, the border highway there, which is on the other side of the wall where we were standing when we filmed this. And it's a very dangerous situation there. People running across the highway to get away. That's what we saw in the streets. Those people were in the country. They had made it into the country. And some of those individuals we actually found to have tattoos consistent with the Venezuelan prison gang Tren de Aragua. We had many sources with familiarity of this gang confirm that, which is the crown, the 5-point crown on their necks. This is the same gang that Jose Ibarra, the alleged murderer of Laken Riley, was a part of, as well as his brother Diego. It's a very violent gang that has been active in other areas of the country, like New York. The NYPD recently warned about them. So they're very active in this country now, and it's something that's very concerning as well.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
How active are these gangs, by the way? Speaking of which, obviously, with all the fentanyl and human trafficking, I mean, they're right at the heart of it all and working with the cartels.
Right. The gangs are very active, and some of them, try to lay low for now. Some of them have sent the message, just wait until more of us get into the country and then kind of figure out what to do from there and gain more territory, because that's a big thing for these gangs, is having territorial control. But again, some of the tools of these gangs, I mean, in the streets of El Paso, there were little ganglands almost that they had created. They had a couple of pit bulls. They had bought cars in the area. They were driving Ubers. Of course, they have those tattoos. They were receiving, their meals from the local church there, which is very well known to migrants. They help all the migrants out there mostly that are dropped off after Border Patrol has arrested them. And so we saw a lot of that kind of activity. And speaking with the locals in the area, it's very unsettling for them. People, who try to just walk around the neighborhood can't go down the same streets they used to go down at night. Some of the people that, live along the border fence have people jumping onto their property all the time, and it's very terrifying to them. And some of them don't always hear them, or they'll find them under their cars. That's the situation they're dealing with. And then, of course, we know people across this country are starting to see the effects of that, just because we've had so many millions of people come across that they have ended up in, of course, your listeners' neighborhoods and in New York.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're hearing about this week, too, is they're starting to give debit cards to the migrants. And we've seen these stories of where people have been moved out of schools so the migrants could move in for a day when there was the flooding. A lot of people are saying, well, why are homeless veterans getting $350 a week debit cards?
Exactly. And we've seen how brazen some of these migrants can be. They know that that's a pull factor. They know to come to places that offer them those resources. This isn't something, that is just given to those who come before them, who are there now in New York, and then it just stops. I mean, it's a big factor in people's decision-making when they cross the border, where they're going to go, where they can get the help they need. And that sounds pretty attractive to those people. Along with the fact that you have migrants, there's a migrant on TikTok who's been advertising basically how he scams the system. He begs for money, how he has a Social Security card, how he gets, SNAP benefits to buy food, and how he's really milking the system. And he's basically guiding migrants through this. This is something we're starting to see more of. It's like a little industry for them. And this is something that, of course, taxpayers have to shoulder that burden.
You talked about a TikToker. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but there was the one also who has a big following who's also promoting, hey, squatters' rights, everybody, come on in. And he mentioned that he had a friend, I think, who was from Africa, who has 7 houses. And when you see that, how much are they learning about where the vulnerabilities are, how to take advantage of the system, sadly, on social media. How big of a role do you think social media is playing with these folks for, folks who are saying, okay, we don't have anything, but then suddenly they all seem to have, $1,000 iPhones in their hands?
Exactly. Social media plays a huge role in this, not just for cartels, but for these individuals who are just normal people that found a way to get something, and then they're showing everyone else. I've seen Turkish smugglers that pose as travel agencies on social media, on TikTok, on Facebook. They share the ways you can come to the United States through the southern border illegally, and they have pretty sophisticated methods set up in the airports in places like Cancun to get people into the United States. And that's another nationality that we've seen a big surge of, along with Chinese migrants. There's all these different cottage smuggling industries that kind of pose on social media as travel agencies. And so that's a big tool for them. It's very difficult also for law enforcement to go after some of these, because if it's on something like Telegram or WhatsApp, some of these encrypted apps, it makes it really difficult to investigate and to actually go in and see what's going on to break up these smugglers.
Yeah, and it's amazing how, the word gets out, as you said. You talked about earlier the gotaways. I thought about recently we saw the border chief under President Biden come out and say what keeps him up at night. And he brought up that in just the last fiscal year, and you know this all too well, he said there's been about 140,000 in just the last, this is just the last fiscal year, which isn't even over yet, as you know. And that's a lot of gotaways. And these are the people who, they have no idea about. That really is deeply concerning, because there's so many that just come through the system and they get, shuffled through and, hey, come back to court in 7-8 years. So that you got to be pretty bad if you're one of the gotaways who doesn't even want to go through that, delayed process, which actually seems like a pretty easy pass compared to how border enforcement's been done under President Trump. But now these are the ones that really you have to concern about, because they have no idea who they are, right?
Exactly. And I kind of highlighted about what's in the streets of El Paso, those gotaways, gang tattoos, seem to be affiliated with the Venezuelan prison gang El Tren de Aragua. We see that kind of industry popping up, unfortunately, too, is not only with the criminal elements, but the gotaways can also be people who are trafficked. So this is allowing a whole other portion of people to be, abused in this country and to be taken advantage of. And that's another situation, whether it's sex trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking. We see the unaccompanied minor numbers spiking. We found out from the New York Times, which has done great reporting, that some of these children end up in really dangerous labor conditions at slaughterhouses where they are injured on the job. And of course, without any kind of immigration record, it's very hard to speak out, to get the help when you're alone. And this is your supposed sponsor, is someone who says they're your uncle. And the system is not set up so that people are vetted very well. And of course, the overwhelming number of these kids coming across makes it even more difficult to track these things and to vet who you're handing off children to. So aside from that, there's kind of an issue. If anyone should be concerned about this, because whether you care about the safety and, the well-being of these children, or you care about the safety of your community, there's an issue here for you.
You talked about the kids, which is so heartbreaking. And Jennie, you know it firsthand. You've been down there and seen just how big of an industry and the human trafficking, what's happening. I remember, I think it was Mayorkas who testified and said, yeah, there are 85,000 kids that are missing. That was about a year ago. Where is the outcry of that, especially from the Democratic Party, who I remember over, it was the kids in cages. It turned out a lot of that was tied to Obama, but they were trying to blame it, on Trump. And yet here we are, and there's tens of thousands of kids missing, and gosh knows what kind of conditions they're in.
That was part of that New York Times report, actually. The government itself won't say that those 85,000 children can't be reached, that they can't find them. And so that's a really concerning thing. You have mainstream media on this, but you can't get the people in charge to really speak out on it and to admit fault or admit that there's an issue with how they're tracking these things. Why isn't ICE involved? Why Are they not doing these worksite enforcement tactics? That ended too with the Biden administration, searching workplaces and ensuring that they're compliant with immigration laws. That's a way to actually counter some of these trafficking issues. So that all stopped as well. So you do have these missing children when you think about it as well. Let's say a new president comes into play in the next election. Well, that's a big task to inherit, 85,000 children. On top of the fact that you have all these people, let's say it's Donald Trump who wins the election, he's trying to carry out a mass deportation. That's a huge task for ICE as well. It's going to be an uphill battle if there's a Republican administration like Trump.
Yeah, how do you locate all these people, even if you do want to deport them? How do you find them? Many of them integrating into society. I also think about the dangers, too, because even if the border were to be closed tomorrow, and President Biden could do a lot of these things with executive order, which he won't do, or at least he hasn't so far, and yet we will feel the repercussions because there have been a number of people on the terrorist watch list. You brought up also you were there in El Paso with what you saw there. Wasn't there a Hezbollah guy who was planning to come to New York, and he was going through El Paso? I mean, there are a lot of bad folks that we know of. I can't even imagine how many folks have come into this country that we don't know of yet, Jenny.
Exactly. And we had learned, previously in my reporting, I had found out that there was an Al-Shabaab member who made it into our country for nearly a year after crossing the southern border illegally. This wasn't a got-away either. This is someone who was in custody at one point of Border Patrol. Border Patrol ran his name, said, you know what, he's a mismatch on the terror watch list. They released him into the country. Nearly a year later, ICE finds out, you know what, this guy's not a mismatch. This guy was part of the weapons and bomb manufacturing for Al-Shabaab. He's Somali. He's in Minneapolis. We got to go get him. So within 48 hours of ICE learning of this, after nearly a year in the country, he was nabbed. So they do release these people, according to my previous reporting. I mean, that's a really scary thing. And I don't know if that's just a one-off. That's something we're always trying to pursue is where do these terror watch listed individuals go? And do we know of everyone that's terror watch listed? Because our systems have to be, in check with other countries. We don't have the intelligence sharing with countries like Venezuela or China, countries like Iran. Those are adversaries. Those are foreign adversaries. So it's very concerning that we're seeing people coming from outside of Latin America, from those countries that we don't have the information sharing with.
Yeah, we have no idea. And like, as you said, no information sharing. A lot of them don't even want to accept. They won't accept even if we try to deport them. And we certainly don't have their criminal history. I mean, think about how vulnerable. Do you believe, as we're hearing from so many of our intel folks, like we heard from the head of the FBI and a number of others who recently testified that they are seeing alarm bells going off everywhere, that this is essentially one of the most dangerous times ever in America because we are so vulnerable. And yet the border's still wide open.
Exactly. That is the really terrifying reality for the Border Patrol agents that I speak with, is they feel not only complicit in human smuggling and trafficking, but they feel like they could be releasing someone who is on a terror watch list, who is on the radar of law enforcement, maybe somewhere else, maybe he has an Interpol notice. These are really scary things for them that they feel, unfortunately, is complicit in.
Which is just so heartbreaking as they're trying to do the best they can to hold the line and to protect America. And like you said, there are so many issues and so many holes with information and also with just lack of will, sadly, from the White House in many levels. Jennie Taer, thank you so much. And everybody, be sure to subscribe and share to this podcast. And Jennie, great work there on the front lines there in El Paso and along the border, and your terrific reporting that you've been doing. And I know you'll continue to do. You got to come back on again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Rita.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.